Hello and welcome to Teaching My Cat to Read, the very serious book review podcast. I'm Eli.
I'm Em.
And I'm Lottie. And this week we're discussing everything about Out of the Silent Planet by C.S. Lewis.
Good old Clive.
Jiggle, jiggle, jiggle. I know. Clive Staples Lewis.
And he almost deserved it.
His foray into science fiction. I mean, I don't know, because I obviously, I know C.S. Lewis from Narnia, and that's it. And I feel this book, we will have to go into the, I say backstory to C.S. Lewis, but like, explain a bit more about his, like, life.
I don't know anything about C.S. Lewis, apart from that I think he's a bit of a tool.
It doesn't actually help you understand this absolutely insane book that much.
It's absolutely bonkers. I mean, shall we do a very brief... I feel this book needs a brief introduction before we even do the terrible summaries, just so it makes a mediocre of sense.
See, I don't know, because I think there is a really simple way to summarise it, and it is local philologist gets kidnapped... Philologist gets kidnapped to Mars, uses his linguistics degree for good, and then goes home.
Basically.
Also, there's a eugenicist and a capitalist there, and they both suck.
And there is also Space Jesus. Although he's not actually Jesus, he's like a senior angel, kind of. There is actual Jesus later on in this series. So this is the first book in a trilogy. Yeah. This one is called Out of the Silent Planet. The next one is called Perelandra, and the last one is called That Hideous Strength. And the first two are local philologist goes on a space adventure, and there's weird Gnostic Christianity happening. The last one is absolutely insane. C.S. Lewis read The Once and Future King and then took a load of speed. And I would love to read the rest of this trilogy for the podcast. But this one is actually, if you can believe it, the most tame and understandable of the three. Yeah.
I mean, we've got Ransom, who is the professor of philology. Basically, which I did have to go and Google because I was like, is he a philosopher? See, I don't know.
I took a philology paper in my master's, and I should know thus how to pronounce it, except we just referred to it as Germanic Phil.
Germanic Phil.
Which was very confusing because we had Germanic Phil and we had Celtic Phil. And then in our university, one of our classes, we had a German Phil and an Irish Phil, and we referred to them as such to tell them apart. So I'd be like, I fucking hate Germanic Phil. And people would be like, what the German Phil's lovely. What's wrong with you? And I'd be like, I mean the class. I mean the paper. I mean, the thing that's forcing me to learn Old Norse, that thing.
Whereas my spouse has a T-shirt that says putting the lol in philology.
I mean, from Wikipedia, philology is the study of language in oral and written historical sources. It is the intersection of textual criticism, literary criticism, history, and linguistics, which is a big bucket, and I'm pretty sure half those words, like... I don't understand, but that's Ransom. He's a professor of philology at a college of the University of Cambridge. Then you have Dr. Weston, who is I love this description on Wikipedia, is a thick-set physicist, ruthless and arrogant, who mocks classics and history and such trash in favour of the hard sciences.
Like, I don't want to call him like a Dawkins-type atheist STEM bro, but he's not a Dawkins type atheist STEM bro.
Oh, he is absolutely like a new atheist. And the thing is that, particularly in the second book as well, where he comes back and then gets possessed by Satan. It's a great time. It sort of
couldn't have happened to a nicer bloke.
I know, right? It happens as a result of extreme hubris as well, which is just completely in keeping with the character. And it's sort of C.S. Lewis basically says in one of his later writings about the book that he realised that Weston would have to be a physicist in order to justify the space travel that happens in this book, and we will get to why exactly he absolutely fails to justify the space travel in this book. But then he realised that Weston would kind of have to know about biology as well.
Yeah, it's such a mess.
You can tell C.S. Lewis was not a scientist, basically. You can tell that he was a philologist.
Yeah. Okay, so this was the fun thing. I did Google some of this because I was like, okay, what did we actually... Because I was I suspected that Darling Clive had maybe not done his research, and I wanted to see by just how much he had not done his research. So obviously I Googled the history of Mars observation. And it turns out that the whole, you know how there's like two main environments on the planet, and it's like the cold atmosphereless surface, and then there's these like crevices in it with rivers and trees, and it's implied later that the Oyasa, the god of this planet, has like made those to save everybody on the planet. So it turns out in the late 1800s, there were a bunch of pop scientists, for want of a better term, who believed that they could see canals on Mars through their telescopes.
As you do.
And that's what he based this off.
And this had like already been disproven by like pretty much as soon as people started saying it, astronomers were like, this is bullshit, actually. None of us can see this. I think your eyes are going.
Wasn't C.S. Lewis also the one who believed in fairies, though?
No, that's Arthur Conan Doyle.
Oh, my bad.
Well, I don't know, actually. I'm saying this. Maybe C.S. Lewis did believe in fairies. I've never asked him.
If any of our listeners do know if C.S. Lewis believed in fairies, email us.
Speaking of Arthur Conan Doyle, but I was like, there is a tradition of authors just falling for hoaxes like that.
Yeah,
I mean, also the fact that the third character in this book, I didn't realise Divine's first name was Richard, shortened to Dick. So it's Dick Divine.
Oh,
that is a porn star name.
Divine Dick. He's got to have some qualities in his life, I guess. Sorry, I've just immediately taken this episode into the gutter.
It's where it belongs. It's where it belongs.
I read it and I literally had to mute my mic because I was just like giggling in the background of like about 5 seconds ago when I noticed it on Wikipedia. And then the fact it's like Weston's accomplice, who was quite ready to laugh at Weston's solemn scientific idealism. He didn't give a damn, he said, for the future of the species or the meeting of the two worlds. And I'm like, okay, you are a bit of a dick.
He just wants to get rich. Yeah.
Just such a dick. I don't know. This book is absolutely bonkers. It's just so...
Sorry, I'm just thinking about the whole, like, Dick Divine, and then it gives a whole other thing to... So one of the first things I wrote down as a note about this book was, why is everybody naked in this fucking spaceship? Just like dicks out from day one.
Okay, this is where we do have to talk about C.S. Lewis being a little freak.
I have a follow-on point from that. So like the fact that this book, so Ransom basically... The backstory starts from the start of this book where he's going on a ramble and he's like, okay, I'm going to go on a ramble, and then he just runs into this house because he needs somewhere to stay, which is owned by Ransom. And Weston, sorry. And Weston just asking him all these questions like, would anyone miss you? If you weren't there, would anyone know?
Divine. It's Divine that's asking these questions because they know each other from school.
Yeah. And then and Ransom's just sitting there very happily like, no, nobody in the world knows where I am in time. I could be gone for months before anybody thought it was strange. And it's like, dear, my sweet darling idiot.
And Divine literally goes, well, there's got to be a catch somewhere. Yeah. He's like, there's got to be a catch. Surely somebody... It's like the most suspicious ever. Also, sorry, this whole episode becomes even funnier when you realise that C.S. Lewis based Ransom on Tolkien.
Yeah.
So that whole passage of local philologist too stupid to realise he's being kidnapped is Clive dragging Tolkien for filth. And it is... it's so funny. It's so funny. It's revenge for Treebeard. Yeah. It's revenge for that I made you into a tree that never gets to the point.
It's just the fact that then they kidnap Ransom and they put him on the spaceship, which is in the shape of a ball, and this annoys me on 69 different levels. But anyway.
69, eh?
Like, too many levels. It's like, why don't you just make a... why do you think it's a ball? It's not an aerodynamic shape.
I actually love it. I find it very endearing how bad C.S. Lewis was at envisioning what space travel would look like, you know?
And it's interesting to me which bits he does, like, get. Like, the whole, like, sometimes Mars is nearer and thus it's easier to travel, and sometimes it's not very near and it would be harder for us to get home.
And you have to go close to the sun in order to get home and nearly melt and die.
Yeah. And, like, I think the whole thing about it, the spaceship being round was kind of supposed to be, like, a sort of crude artificial gravity.
Yes.
Which is not, I know he's not right, but he's also not wrong either. Like, there's a rotational component to any attempted artificial.
Just enough sense to it that I can forgive it. And it's also very charming.
I mean, the thing is, I was just going, this is just a shape that would just not work. Just make it into a arrow or anything, please. And then the fact that they basically go, oh, we want artificial gravity. I'm like, okay, Grant, I can get on board with this. My background in STEM permits me to get on board with the artificial gravity. But then the fact that everyone's like, oh, you got to take all your clothes off because I don't know why.
It's never actually explained. This is what got me. If he'd even tried.
The only thing I can think of is that in C.S. Lewis's mind, if they were wearing clothes and there was very little gravity, all the clothes would like float away.
Oh my god, he was expecting them to drown in moonlight, strangled by their own bras. He was expecting the Carrie Fisher death.
Would you like to know the answer to this in universe, or would you like to be left?
Please tell me.
Okay, the answer is because, and this is where we get into the weird Gnostic Christianity, is that in this sort of understanding, heaven is space and it's filled with like light rays that you can't get on Earth that make you feel like you're in heaven, right? And it's very sort of, Gnostic understanding of like, the world and spirituality. And if you are naked, then you absorb more of these rays and you are more in heaven. And that's it.
I mean, I sort of like, if we're bringing the Gnosticism into it, the thing that would jump out at me is specifically the idea that matter is evil. So having, like, things be less matter, like gross matter on you. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. I just find it weird.
The explanation that my brain was doing was I guess maybe it's really warm. He said it was quite warm in bits of the spaceship, but he also said that the other side was cold. Like, there's one hot wall and one cold wall. So, so you don't have to lose your pants. I don't care how hot it is.
It's also just like if it's that hot, if you've made a space, so they have made a spaceship. They've not only made a spaceship, they've made a form of artificial gravity. And in none of this,
you can't manage air conditioning.
Has the one thick-set physicist, Dr. Weston, thought of thermodynamics? Like he's gone, F it, I've done my artificial gravity, but it's going to be so baking hot that you've all got to be naked.
Yeah, but I mean, it works, right? They get there alive.
Oh, I'm not saying it doesn't work, but it's absolutely like...
He's a physicist. He's not an engineer. He doesn't care about comfort. He doesn't care about, are they going to get there alive? I don't care how miserable they become in the process.
But I feel the physicist would at least care about the thermodynamics.
Also, can I just say how upsetting it was to... Because the first time I read this, I did not twig that everybody's naked in the spaceship. That passed me by completely. Lucky past M. But rereading this, I reread this just after I found out about the whole C.S. Lewis getting drunk at parties and asking people to let him whip them thing.
I'm sorry, what?
This is what I wanted to talk about when I said he's a little freak and we need to discuss it.
I'm sorry, what the actual... And excuse my French.
Okay, baby sadist, fine. But, why you gotta be so sloppy about it? There's specific parties for that. Don't just go into random parties and get super drunk and ask people.
Confused. Do you remember what he said about Tolkien, though?
If somebody gives him a good slap and he'll be perfect.
Yeah, I was like, that's not... You can't say that.
I don't understand.
Clive, that's not allowed.
I just... what the hell?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think we might have broken Lossie with this one.
Yeah.
Also, he describes the whole, I think it's the rays or, the sort of sensation of being, in the spaceship and gravity not being quite right and the temperature being up and this kind of bathing in cosmic rays euphoria type as an enjoyable mix of pain and pleasure. And I'm just sitting there like, Clive, your kink is showing.
We might have to read the second book.
Oh, no, I don't like the way you said that.
In the second book, there is no physics with space travel. The space travel is done by Angel.
Okay,
and
fair enough.
Ransom has a acid trip while en route to Venus in the second. So this one he goes to Mars, which is known as Malacandra, and it's common. The second one is Perelandra, which is Venus, and the whole plot of that one is Ransom has to stop the second Garden of Eden from the people eating the apple, or doing the equivalent bad thing. And it's all bad. And as a Jew, I have issues with it. But anyway, everybody is naked all the time in that book, and en route to Perelandra, Ransom has an acid trip spiritual sexual experience that just turns his brain inside out, and it's so funny. And you can tell from reading it that C.S. Lewis was just a little bit insane.
See, this is the bit where it being a Tolkien insert makes it much, much weirder.
And I think it just shows how A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet did it really well.
Yeah.
I love comparing those two. Comparing this to Long Way.
I mean, I actually have a very serious thesis about this, but I'll let Lottie finish.
No, it's basically the fact he kept mentioning like day and night as concepts, yet he mentioned also on the spaceship that there was no concept of night because there was no sunset or sunrise, yet...
Oh, well, it was like whichever half of the ship is in shadow.
It was kind of like in A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, Becky Chambers had like written it so that it was like 10 days instead of a week. And so you kind of got an idea of what they were talking about. But in this, I got so confused because I was like, well, he's night. But he just said there was no, it's a shadow. I'm confused. Like, what? Just cool. Yeah. It was kind of like that lack of, I say attention to detail is the wrong word, but using terms that don't work in sci-fi because there is not an equivalent for it. So you wouldn't use, say, nighttime if there is no such thing as nighttime. You'd say, I'm going to sleep.
I know, he says he's going to the dark side of the ship. He's like...
Maybe I speed read it too fast.
There is a section where he talks about, like, oh, we choose when it's nighttime because we get to just go to the bit of the ship that's dark, and then that's what we call nighttime. I feel
like you should have called it, like, you should choose when you go to sleep rather than you choose when it's nighttime. I don't know, I found that really jarring. But maybe
I feel like for me it was kind of like, because they weren't habitual space travellers, it's you know, they are going to be trying to map it to things that they understand. And that's actually like a really major theme. And one of the things I think that Clive actually does quite well in this book is that kind of, like, there's that moment where Ayla and I were talking about this, where like, when Ransom first stumbles off the spaceship, for a little while there, his eyes literally cannot interpret what he's seeing because it's so different from anything else he's ever seen. And that, as a theme, sort of continues, that like, he meets a bunch of other sapient races and it takes him a while to kind of get his head around that they're people.
And that comes back at the end as well.
Well, yeah, because when he finally sees Weston and Divine again, and he's like, if for a second he doesn't recognize them as human beings, he's like, well, they look like sapient beings, but like, I don't recognize them. Why are they this weird shape?
They're weird and pear-shaped and stocky. Yeah. But the way that I was going to say it comes back is when, so he's a philologist and he spends a lot of his time learning the language of Malacandra, or specifically the language of one of the 3 sentient species that lives there. And later on, there's this bit where basically he and also Weston and Divine are on trial before the god of this planet, the Oyasa. And Weston is trying to do a colonialism and explain that it's okay for him to murder all of the Martians because that means that man will continue to exist. And he doesn't speak the language well enough, and Ransom's having to translate for him, and Ransom just can't translate some of the concepts that Weston's trying to describe because they don't exist in the language. And it's this sort of combination of the inability to empathize or to connect with these people that are different to them, and Ransom can do it and Weston can't, and Divine doesn't try.
I think it's quite interesting, like, because that's one of the things actually on the like Wikipedia page is just this whole thing of this gulf between, you know, the invaders, for want of a better word, the like Westerns, and then like the translation, because I think that's very common in quite a lot of languages, just in general, that, you know, you can't translate certain phrases or concepts because it is either, you know, to that language, like trying to explain probably English idioms to someone whose English is not their first language.
Yeah, things that are bound up in a lot of cultural context, or, you know. Yeah,
there's like a lot of like cultural context to it, and so I thought it was quite an interesting point. It was quite interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, this goes back to kind of, so this is prepare for my very serious thesis statement. Yeah. I actually think, as a sci-fi novel, this is trying to do a very similar thing to Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, in that it is very specifically and deliberately a soft science sci-fi book. It is looking at biology, it's looking at sociology, it's looking at anthropology, linguistics. Like, it's the point is, and it's something that I think is actually done quite well, is that like Ransom is really scared when he gets here because he doesn't understand anything. And he's picturing, because of the way sci-fi on Earth has sort of progressed, he's been picturing these like cold, emotionless higher beings that won't give a shit about him and that he won't be able to relate to at all, and that would kill him as soon as look at him. Or like, you know, these vast arrays of megalomaniac computers, you know, and actually that's not it at all. And actually, you know, there's a bunch of different... Yeah, there's just different people living their lives and in thinking about things in interesting ways that he's never encountered before. And like the attention specifically to like different animals and like the way plants are different but the same. And like there's just a lot in there that feels very like I'm genuinely trying to imagine what it would be like to meet other species, you know, like other sapient species. I'm genuinely interested in how that would work.
In a way, it kind of reminds me of these books I keep talking about, the Children of Humanity and Children of Ruin, where it's Adrian Tchaikovsky imagining what if it was spiders that became sentient, and like what would their science look like, what would their culture look like, how would all of these things have become like be different. And I mean, one of the things I really like about this book is there's this point where Ransom is talking with some of the friends that he's made when he first comes to, like when he first meets Martians. It's these this species called the Harossa, and they're basically like kind of giant otters, and they're sort of like, they love poetry and like song, and they're not very scientific, but they have a lot of like sort of like I guess inspired by kind of some old English to the traditions, I guess. Like the poetic edits and stuff. And anyway, and he's trying to explain to them the concept of war. And like, you know, he's saying what would happen if, you know, this other species wanted food and they didn't have any food and you didn't want to give them the food. And his friend, who's a member of this otter species, is like, well, of course we just give them food. Why wouldn't we give them food?
Yeah.
Like, they cannot grasp the kind of conflict.
Yeah.
And like, and Ransom is there later reflecting about various differences that this culture has that seem to be shared across Mars, like this inability to understand, almost like greed, and saying, actually, I think humans are kind of the aberration. Actually, this is a really natural way to be for these, you know, these others, these other people. I thought that was very interesting.
This is the other thing that I think, like, you know, as you all know, I don't have a lot of time for C.S. Lewis generally.
Dear old Clive Staples.
But like one of these the things about this book that actually brought me around in, I think, a way that like none of his other works have, is that this book is staunchly anti-capitalist and pretty staunchly anti-imperialist. It's difficult to judge because I think Ransom's got a lot of like well-meaning sort of white middle class British citizen of the 1930s.
Maybe.
Yeah. And like he's gotten through a lot of it by the end, I think, but it's difficult. It's kind of difficult to judge how much of that is intentional on C.S. Lewis's part and how much of it is just, this is as close as you can get to anti-colonialist in this time period generally or whatever. Is this is as good as it gets, or whether it's an intentional like contrast to... Yeah, anyway, the point, and obviously, sorry, I'm saying that like there weren't anti-colonialist movements in the 30s, which there very obviously were, but like, yeah, anyway, where was I going with this? I had a point. I like that the philosophy of this whole book is very much like, yeah, capitalism stinks, and imperialism also stinks, and I like that Weston looks like a fucking fool trying out his stupid...
Yeah. Do you know what it actually also shares with Long Way? Is the, not quite as strongly, but like, people are good, actually. By default, people are good. Or at least in the natural order of things. And I mean, to be fair, part of the thesis of this book is that the natural order of things includes an authoritative god and people obeying those rules, but which is not at all the case in Long Way. But yeah. Thinking about this as a peculiar example of C.S. Lewis writing, the second book in this trilogy apparently was his favourite thing he ever wrote.
Okay. That worries me a little bit, I'll be honest.
A little bit. I don't know, like, what do you think of the... I guess because I think, I mean, maybe this is just me, but one thing that I struggled with on my speed read was... I don't know, I find it quite complicated when, with the different types of aliens and, like, the very I say not English, but, like, the very difficult to read words. I
think Fiffle Triggy is just like, that's just an arsehole move.
And it's kind of like, I'm like, they all look the same. It's just like the suffix or the prefix has changed, which is like wonderful, but not when you're dyslexic. I'm like, it's the same word, but it's not. What's going on? But I'm curious what you guys thought of that, because yeah, I find it kind of complicated.
I mean, I've had enough dead languages beaten into my skull that it was just like, yeah, all right. That's like, yeah, that
I
tracks.
will roll with the thing.
Yeah, I'm a weirdo who loves that stuff, so...
It's never going to be as weird as medieval Welsh, so, like...
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't know. I just made a note going, I don't know who these people are. I mean, it doesn't help. Again, speed read it, but I was just going, I'm so confused, but...
Yeah, it's quite dense in some places where it's like there's just a lot of information to take in and you can't tell which of it's going to be relevant later because a lot of it isn't.
Yes, yeah, I think maybe that is nail on the head, yeah.
And the prose is kind of, it's not like quite purple prose, but it is dense and sort of, I don't know.
It's odd. It's an odd style, I think, because it's almost readable, and then there's something that makes it not quite, like sometimes I could get caught up in it and I'd be like, yeah, this is fine. And other times I would be like, there's just this like distance where I'm just like, I can't quite, this isn't as clear as you want it to be. This is harder work than it should be for what it is. And I can't tell how much of that is just Ransom pissing me off.
You can tell that he has something very specific in his head that he's trying to convey through these words, and to a greater or lesser extent, he succeeds sometimes. I would say also the end of the second book is like, it's basically sort of abstract poetry. Like, it's very good for what it is.
Oh my God.
But it's... Yeah, we might not end up doing it for the podcast. Maybe I'll do a write-up. Maybe I'll finally do a book review for the blog,
I think it's one of those things where, because my sole experience with C.S. Lewis is Narnia. I've read all the Narnia books, and
the Narnia is a lot more readable.
It's for children, and this isn't.
I mean, it is for children, and so I think going into it, I don't know why my brain thought, I don't know why you'd think, it's going to be the same sort of style as Narnia, and it's obviously not, because one's for kids and one's not. But
and I mean sci-fi versus fantasy as well. I think
it's kind of like it's your only exposure to that author, and not only that, it's your only exposure to an author who's quite well known for that one particular book. Like if you said C.S. Lewis to people, they'd say Narnia.
Well, it depends on the circle.
Like in pop culture,
because I was raised in the church, right? I was raised in the Church of England, and yes, Narnia, but also he's done a lot of writing that people read his religious writings.
Yeah, the problem of pain and...
Exactly, yeah. I had read a couple of his things when I was a teenager after having read Narnia. And his writing for adults is far more like this. I mean, it's probably even denser and sort of more abstruse or referencing sort of obscure things, because, again, he was a weirdo.
But yeah, it was interesting because I don't know if you'd call it stylistic necessarily, but the thing that it actually most reminded me of, and this is going to make me a massive nerd, I am a C.S. Lewis level nerd, but actually kind of reminds me of Augustine a little bit, the church father. Okay, hear me out. Because on the one hand, the man is an utter fucking clown. Yes, there are bits of this book. There is a moment in this book where he describes an island as a low sloping pyramid, or like a woman's breast, and you go, pyramid, breast, Clive. And you're just like, what are you talking about? There's bits where you're like, why is everybody naked in the spaceship? Why is Ransom so stupid?
Who was the female author who met him and described him as like, he's perfectly nice, but he doesn't understand that women are people?
Dorothy L. Sayers. He's like a charming old duffer, but like he doesn't register women as a thing at all. He's just like completely useless. It's Dorothy L. Sayers. But like, there's moments of complete clownery, like Augustine's whole, have you ever looked at a baby? That's evidence of original sin right there. And, the theatre is evil and all of that stuff. And then occasionally he'll come up with something so brain-meltingly profound that you're just like, where the did that come from?
It balances out, He's a clown 90% of the time. And then the remaining 10%, it's like, oh, okay, you can actually think.
Yeah. And like that was what this reminded me of, where there was a lot of times where I was just like, what are you doing?
Where did Augustine fall on the sort of Gnostic?
Gnostic was very much a heresy at that point.
Yeah, because it was like in the 2nd century that the Fathers of Christianity came out against it and wrote like Irenaeus and all that lot, right?
Yeah. I think Irenaeus, I want to say 2nd century for Irenaeus, but I'm not 100%. But it's like the thing that people like Augustine are up in arms about is the concept of grace and predestination more.
Okay, not the whole like people are inherently, like matter is inherently sinful and we've got to go to space to go to heaven. Yeah.
No, they are pretty much over that, I think.
Okay. Don't
quote me on that, but that's not like the main thing that they're worried about.
Because that to me is the bit that's like, okay, you all are like on something.
So, I'm saying this, and now I'm going, and, if we've got any theologians in the crowd, please correct me on this, but, like, there's a thing so the whole matter is inherently sinful, and the fact that we are embodied at all is the result of a great evil that created the earth and trapped us.
The demiurge.
In this, like, horrible meat body, which, I mean...
Sometimes.
They were onto something. A little bit, maybe.
Every now and then, you get your period and you think the Gnostics had something going on.
Yeah. Every time I have a gastritis flare-up, I'm like, yeah, no, bodies were a mistake, actually. Anyway, but, like, the whole people are inherently... As we exist currently, are inherently sinful thing is a thing that Augustine is kind of pushing a little bit.
Well, isn't that what original sin means in practice, right?
Yeah. That, like, Augustine argued that because of original sin, every human is inherently sinful, and we only go to heaven via the grace of God. In contrast to Pelagius, who was more in favour of a sort of good place style point system, in which it's theoretically possible to live a perfect life, and God's grace kind of doesn't play into whether you kind of go to heaven or not, or whether you're a good Christian or not. And, like, if we're talking about sort of inherent sinfulness versus what you choose mattering, Augustine is closer to the Gnostics, maybe. I don't actually know. I'm saying that. I don't actually know how the sort of matter is inherently sinful plays into what they think about what humans actually do. In Gnostic heresy, it's one of those. It's one of those things. I came up against it occasionally in wider reading, and never actually sort of dug deep on because it was pretty past by the time the people I was studying were getting angry about the Anglo-Saxon invasions or whatever.
I think that's maybe one of the difficulties, because I'm reading this book in complete face value with very little, like, from an academic or other background of like religious understanding. So I'm just reading the scene completely face value, no sort of C.S. Lewis wrote Narnia, that's it, and that's all I know. And so a lot of it I'm like, but I know there's clearly a deeper meaning to this, but either I'm a complete moron, or this I'm not the audience for this book. Maybe the context to what he's writing about, or, like I say, referring to, or sort of playing upon in this book, because I just did not pick up any of it. I was like, okay, cool, we've got a flying football, and then they've gone to Mars. Like, I know there's a religious undertone, the same way in Narnia.
I don't know that I think that I don't think you need to know that his conception of sort of creation and the cosmos is Gnostic for it to kind of hold together.
Oh, I'm not saying it doesn't hold together. I feel like, as in,
it doesn't hold together anyway, so, right.
But, like, it doesn't, I don't appreciate anything more than a face value read of this book, because there is just understanding that, like, I kind of go, okay, there's the linguist guy, like, the philologist there. It just feels very plot point convenient. I was like, okay, that's handy. It's handy he wasn't, like, a welder.
Yeah, I mean, but that's another thing, because I think that's part of the point that he's making, is that, like, the other softer sciences are valuable, and the sort of, it had to be a linguist because it had to be somebody who could make that point, who could be like, I would want to talk to these people.
This book is also basically a fictionalized version of an essay that he wrote called Religions and Rocketry.
Okay.
Which is about why the idea of aliens doesn't break Christianity. And him bringing a lot of kind of Gnostic planetary mysticism into what then would have been like sort of more mainstream Christianity, to try and say, well, actually, if there are people on other planets, they could be Christians too, and here's how. So it is also like it sits alongside some of his academic work as well. So I think Lottie does have a point about, like, there is context that makes this.
So I have a couple of things
meaningful
about this, and this is because I'm a massive nerd and I went to a medievalist conference on Zoom over the weekend. But there were a couple of things that they were talking about that I think are quite relevant here. Firstly, that there is a tendency of, there are examples in medieval literature of people having like here is a prose or a non-fiction thing where I'm explaining to you a concept, or like grammar, or the importance of virginity, or just because I want to drag Old Helm again. But and like then there will be a poetic thing, a poetic work that lives alongside it that kind of illustrates it or makes it pretty, so that you've got the serious thing and then you've got the illustrative
Like a parable?
Yeah, kind of. So the example that the lecturer I went to was talking about was Tatwinner's Enigmata, which is, so Tatwinner was one of the archbishops of Canterbury, and he wrote a grammar, so a book about grammar, about how it works and how you define nouns and that kind of thing. And then accompanying that, there's a book of riddles. And the riddles make use of the grammatical concepts and distinctions and ambiguities that he talks about in the grammar.
Okay.
So there's this kind of like a sort of a thing of, okay, so I've done the serious thing that will help you teach this, and now I've also done a like, here's a different approach to kind of demonstrate or embody this concept for you. And make it more accessible. And that's a thing in that there's a bunch of what they call opus geminatum, like twinned works in Anglo-Saxon stuff that kind of does a similar thing. And the other thing I was thinking about was, so there was a lecture about the Wonders of the East, which is a text that's in the Beowulf manuscript, among a couple of others, and it's sort of a collection of what scholars have generally called monsters, and this academic was arguing should be wonders or marvels. But they were, one of the things that they said was that Augustine argued that like things like the dog-headed men from myth and legend and all of that, like we had to regard them as people, but with a purpose, because God made them. Like they wouldn't be here if they weren't meant to be here, which means that, which has implications for their personhood. And I wonder if maybe that would have been a similar thing for aliens, is, that like God, you could make that argument. If they exist, God made them. And that means they're supposed to be here, which again, why would he bother to make them unable to be Christian or to go to heaven or any of that?
I mean, as far as I can tell, that's kind of as far as Judaism has a stance on the existence of extraterrestrial life, it's just like, cool, not our problem. Why would we have any beef with them? Kind of thing.
I was going to say the other thing this discussion reminded me of was the can Shadim be Jewish?
Yeah.
But yeah, sorry, that was a long ramble about a very cool conference that I went to the other day, where I am shockingly badly paraphrasing a bunch of very cool lectures. But yeah, like it tracks that. Like, this is a fictionalized account that's intended to convey something that he also tried to get through in a non-fiction. Like, that tracks. Also, like, sorry, this brings me on. Could we talk about, like, the meta aspect a little bit?
Go for it.
Because the way that the book is kind of set up is that...
Oh, the framing device.
Yeah. Is that, like, Ransom got home, called up the C.S.Lewis self-insert, and was like, dude, have I got a story to tell you?
No, that's not what happens. What happens is the C.S. Lewis author avatar, it like corresponds with Ransom on philology every now and then.
Oh, yeah,
and
it's the answer thing.
I came across this manuscript by Bernardus Silvestris, and it contains this word I don't know, Oiases. And he asks, and it basically goes to Ransom completely coincidentally, asking about
if you've ever come across this word, yeah.
And then Ransom is like, oh boy, you might believe me, and calls him up to be like, yo, come over, I've got an absolutely wild tale for you.
Yeah, and then but the other thing is that the fact that it's published at all and that it's fictionalized but also true is something that it's part of a strategy that they have to prevent Weston from getting what he wants. Okay. It's part of an ongoing plan that they have to be like, look, we can't tell people that there are people on Mars because they won't believe us and they'll call us crazy and we won't be able to stop Weston doing his cosmos-wide eugenics bullshit. But if we get people used to the idea that space is not as sci-fi has told us, that there are people out there that we could relate to and that we could learn from and that who would want to relate to us in a sort of sapient person-to-person level, that the universe is warmer as well as queerer than we can suppose. You know, if we get them used to that idea, then maybe we'll have better luck if and when it comes to a crisis and Weston, we need to take down Weston. And I thought it was just an interesting level of meta to it's not quite Dracula with the whole we've recorded this just in case he comes back kind of. Yeah. But it's a little bit, that was interesting to me. Particularly if it's a fictionalized version of an essay that he already wrote, but it's also purporting to be a fictionalized account of a real kidnapping to Mars that has profound implications for the future of the human race.
Yeah. It's just, it's right. Do you want to do our fun questions? Because
we have a new question this episode.
Yeah. Mansplain, manipulate, male wife. In the tradition of marry, kill, who do we think in this book falls into the categories of mansplain, manipulate, male wife?
I mean, I think Divine is manipulating Weston to get on the thing.
I go
by
for
the end, Divine is just kind of given up, and Weston is the one with all the force of personality there.
Well, this is why I think he's mansplain. I think all of his
What, Weston?
Yeah, because all of his his whole thing is desperately trying to convince. To tell a bunch of people who already know how the cosmos works much better than him how things ought to work, and how it ought to work is human supremacy now. And they should just give up their lovely planet to the boot of the human race and all of it. And he's desperately trying to convince these people that that's the natural order of things and they should just let him get on with it. And it's not.
Yeah.
It's not. And I think Ransom's the only candidate for male wife.
Yeah. I hate it, but
it's a deeply cursed question.
Okay, but what if we do gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss?
I think. Oh, I don't know.
I switch it round. I think Divine is gaslight.
Yeah, I'm
just
with you on that
on
one.
The strength of the kidnapping conversation.
Yeah.
I think Weston is gatekeep because of all of the you wouldn't understand with your piffling humanities degree. I tell you what, I did enjoy how much he sounded like that one preface to, I think it's Agadoddin, where the guy's like, don't even bother reading my reconstruction unless you know the following languages. And the following languages are a full-page list, including Proto-Indo-European,
Nobody knows
Sanskrit, Breton, Galician. I don't know.
Proto-European, is it? We don't have it.
Yeah.
Nobody knows that.
Yeah.
It's not still around.
But
does this make Ransom girl boss? Is a sort of Christian girl boss? Tradwife girl boss. Is that the episode title? Tradwife girl boss? Just incomprehensible.
I hate it that I think he might be girl boss. He girl bossed too close to the sun.
Yeah, to girl bossing too close to the sun. Can we just make that? I'm going to put that quote and put it on the Instagram.
That's the episode title is girl bossing too close to the sun. I want to ask who we should fight, but there's some very obvious candidates.
I mean, Weston.
Yeah,
and he gets fought in the next book.
Excellent.
Okay.
I mean, if we're not going to do it for the podcast, I can spoil this for you. Ransom literally kills him with his bare hands.
Nice.
It's very satisfying.
I dig that. That's it's no less than he deserves.
Satan possesses him, and then Ransom is trying to out-debate him, and he realizes he's never going to be able to, so he literally just kills him.
Oh my god, this is... You know what that is? That is Sisko versus Q. It's Q being like, oh man, debate with me about the inherent evil of human nature and whatever, and Picard is like, fine, I'm very scared of you and your supernatural powers.
Fully just punch a Nazi. It's the solution.
Yeah, and Sisko's like, what if I just hit you, actually? I don't want to dance around your f***ing mind game thought experiment superpowers.
And this is why Sisko is the best Star Trek captain apart from Janeway.
Yeah.
Because Janeway would also punch him.
Oh, actually, Janeway doesn't. Janeway has the opportunity and she absolutely does not.
Maybe I don't know. Doesn't want to have to touch him.
Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah. It's that's kind of an interesting.
I added the question, how do you reckon they got into space? Because it's just not mentioned. And it was for me, as my STEM background, I was like, but how did they get the giant ball into space? I'm still thinking giant slingshot.
Ooh, I like it.
Or trebuchet. That's the other one.
I quite like the trebuchet idea. Yeah.
He's just got this giant trebuchet, just slinging this. It probably wouldn't work actually. It'd just be a parabola, but not parabola. Is it parabola? I don't know.
Babe, you are asking the wrong person.
I don't know. We might know. We might be able to do shapes.
See, I actually think it's one of the Cyrano de Bergerac ones where he's like, I covered it in dew, and dew rises in the morning. So like if you like paint the spaceship in dew, that's not exactly what the Cyrano one is, but like there's a bunch of like things in Cyrano de Bergerac.
Such a like ancient Greek philosophy method of like
they're all like that. There's like a list of about 5, and he's using them to desperately convince this creep that's trying to marry the guy there is a guy that Cyrano's in love with. This is different. To marry the girl that Cyrano's in love with while she's busy marrying somebody else. And the whole thing is just him coming up with like even crazier ways to be like, I am the man in the moon and I just fell down. To let me tell you about all the ways I made up to get to the moon. To this guy.
It's just,
And it's very like, we just shot a weird egg-shaped spaceship into space.
I love that C.S. Lewis just does not deal with like the problem of re-entry at all.
Yeah.
Like he doesn't. There's discussion of like the atmosphere and like atmospheres existing or not, and being thinner towards like the top of the higher altitude you go, and then he just doesn't talk about the idea that a spaceship might get f***ed up from having to go through an atmosphere.
Yeah.
It's like you have no heat protection.
Like the people get f***ed up, and I thought that was kind of interesting that he knew enough about that.
And they've been f***ed up by being removed from the
ether.
Sort of the euphoric aliveness of the space between the worlds.
Yeah, the fact that like nobody's throwing up or whatever from the artificial gravity and
or the fact that like the G-force, like the fact the artificial gravity is going to have to overcome the G-force of re-entry.
Yeah, but Ransom gets seasick like 3 days later and does throw up.
But I don't know. It just made me. It made me chuckle that it was.
I tell you what is actually interesting about the whole angels thing is because so I did a bunch of reading about like living in space for Nano last year, and one of the things that I think it was Packing for Mars talked about was like the fact that there is a thing, and that actually like astronaut programs were really worried about was that people would they thought people would go mad, but what actually happened was that this kind of like space euphoria, like people on spacewalks have reported this kind of transcendent, like, I don't want to leave. This is what humans are supposed to be doing, actually, from like just floating around in low gravity. That's
so cool. That makes me really sad I'll never get to experience that, because like, I just never will.
Yeah, and I think that it's really interesting to me that like, that's what C.S. Lewis was like. That's what being in space would be like. It would be this euphoric...
Oh my god, are we going to become C.S. Lewis truthers?
I don't think I have enough understanding of, like,
yeah, like, I don't vibe with a lot of his, like, Christianity at all, but I do vibe with the fact that, yeah, he's, like, actually eugenicists. Actually capitalism. They're both... Not only are they both evil, but they're also both kind of pathetic.
Yeah,
which I like.
Okay, so in the second book, not to shut up about the second book for even a minute, but like literally Weston gets possessed by Satan, and there's this bit where he's doing all this brilliant rhetoric and blah blah blah. Well, not even brilliant, but the whole like fascist, it's sort of bad faith arguing where they change tactics constantly, and selectively choose actions, all of that. But when he's not working on his project of corrupting the Venusian Eve, essentially, he's just being petty and cruel and just annoying Ransom for the hell of it. Like, he's not clever. He can use intelligence, but he doesn't like it. He doesn't value it. It's not... and so, like, this sort of representation of evil within this series, it absolutely is pathetic and, doesn't serve any purpose other than its own continuation. And I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it. It's not like, oh, so-and-so has a point, though, don't they? It's like, no, they don't. You should kill them with your bare hands.
Yeah, it's just a bit. What do we think our darling dear Gothmog?
I think she'd just sort of blink at it and then walk away. I don't think she'd vibe with it at all.
Yeah, it's uninteresting to her, I think. Does that mean it gets a 0?
I mean, is there any crime, backstabbing, cats?
Yeah, but the crime isn't fun crime.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's not like fun, I'm going to put a paw in the kitchen, but I shouldn't be allowed in the kitchen.
It's not
crime.
hijinks.
Yes.
This book is actually hijink free, I would say.
Yeah, no, I think you are absolutely right on that.
Yeah.
There's no cats.
I'm not even convinced there's any humour in it.
There is no backstabbing.
There isn't actually.
It's like people get shot occasionally, but that's sort of it.
Yeah, but they're people we like, so we don't care. Like that's not funny.
That is true. Yeah, it's like Bambi's mother dying sort of situation.
Yeah. It might be a big old duck egg for this one. It might be a 0.
I think it might be as well. Like if we think
that's our first 0, isn't it?
Yeah, keeping the consistency, the consistency and the integrity of the cat rating.
Yeah.
I think it will have to be.
Well, here's the question though.
0.
Before we decide to give this a 0, what if we later read something that gets an even lower rating? Are we just going to have to go into the negatives?
We're going to have to go to negatives. So we could start with imaginary. We could go with imaginary numbers.
Maybe this book is it gets a rating of epsilon where epsilon is smaller than any positive real number that you can think of.
Okay, yeah, that's fair enough. Yeah, it's still a real number.
I feel like going into the abstract maths is in keeping with the general spirit of this book.
Yeah. I got to use my maths degree for something, right? If it's not to amuse myself on this podcast, then what is it for?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to have to go and brush up on my imaginary numbers from the
you should have brought the fluid dynamics into it. What's the flow around the giant metal football being shot into space?
Bad.
Really, really bad. I mean, I just feel from an aerodynamic perspective, I have degree bingo in engineering, and it's just an absolute nightmare. That is my official summary of.
And now we've all used our degrees for. Congrats, team! We did it.
It was worth it.
It was worth it, guys. It was worth it, guys.
On that note, donate to our Ko-fi.
on that note, I mean, we do have a Ko-fi, and I don't think we've actually explained the Ko-fi on the podcast. We've mentioned it, but basically it is a place a la Patreon, but it's not like Patreon because it's not a direct debit and you don't sign up every month. It's just like
you just tip us, basically. Think of it like tipping.
It's a internet-based tip jar where you can throw some pennies or a pound in, and it basically just goes towards our podcast hosting fees so we can keep all the back catalogue online. If you can't or don't want to give monies to the tip jar, you can also shout about the tip jar and or our podcast episodes by giving us a review on, like, I think most of the major platforms, but in particular, I know Apple Podcasts definitely do reviews, as do Podcast Addict, as do Podcast Republic as well. So if you want any of those, you can definitely give ratings and reviews. And on Spotify, you can definitely give a rating. So if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to give us a rating. And we should probably also mention, guys, what we're going to read next week. What are we reading next week? I need to pull it up on the little...
Abhorsen.
Oh my gosh, yes, we are.
Yeah, we're finally finishing the Old Kingdom trilogy.
We are finally finishing the Old Kingdom trilogy. So we've read Sabriel, we've read Lyriel. So if you want to go through the back catalogue and find those episodes and re-listen to those before Abhorsen episode, then please do. You can also follow us on all our various social medias, all linked below. You can follow our blog on our website, and you can also send us an email at teachingmycattoread@gmail.com.
Yeah, tell us if you want us to read Perelandra.
Yeah,
if enough of you tell us to read Perelandra, maybe we will.
If you want me to read Perelandra and just sit in my room and yell about it on my own.
Or a drunk live blog. Drunk live record us reading it and going, what the f*** every 2 seconds.
If there is a book you really think that we should read, just pop it in an email or send us a DM on our socials, and we'll add it to our increasingly ever long list of books that we want to read on this podcast. And it's great getting recommendations. So we've had a few from the audience, and it's been really lovely, like incorporating those in. So yeah, it's been great fun. If you want to connect with us, do say hello, send us a message, and recommend us some books to read. Big virtual hugs, guys, and we will see you next time. Bye.